In other news, National Water Agency (PUB) said today that Singapore has ramped up local production of water to meet demand after some water from Malaysia had to be isolated. This following some households here reporting a pandan smell in boiled tap water, if you remember yesterday.
Yes, now the cause of the scent is tetrahydrofuran or THF. It's an organic compound commonly used as a solvent in industries. Lab tests of water samples taken from the affected homes as well as water mains found trace levels with the concentration equivalent to dissolving 2 tablespoons of a substance into an Olympic-sized swimming pool. The source of the issue was traced to water imported from Malaysia. PUB expects the issue to be resolved today.
Let's talk more about this with Professor Shane Snyder, who's the Executive Director of the Nanyang Environment and Water Research Institute at the Nanyang Technological University. Welcome, Professor. But besides the Johor River in Malaysia, Singapore can count on 3 other taps: desalination, treating used water, as well as rainwater collected in our reservoirs. But how long do you think it will take for the issue to be completely resolved? I mean, PUB says today, but what do you think? And for how long can our local water production sustain Singapore's needs?
Thank you for having me. So our local supply is quite resilient, actually. We've seen it survived through various droughts, etc. And as I understand it, PUB has already taken measures to clear the system of the chemical, and I believe we'll be back in normal production quite quickly.
Prof, how did the THF bypass detection, given Singapore's vigorous water purification system?
Well, I think there's 2 answers to that. First of all, that particular chemical, THF or tetrahydrofuran, is extremely water soluble. The concentration, as you mentioned, was at a very low level. So it's extremely difficult to detect. Actually, perhaps ironically, the human nose is more powerful than most analytical instruments that we can use to detect it in the water. Therefore, we can smell it often before we can detect it.
Right. Well, if THF is tough to detect in the water for all the reasons you just mentioned, what is the risk of this occurring again, or the risk of the public having a long exposure to it?
The risk of it happening again really depends on the watershed, I think, in Malaysia, and being able to maybe better control the discharges. But the fact is, the concentration is extremely low, 10 to 100 times lower than any health advisory I've ever seen. But I think the fact that PUB could detect it quickly and take action really should put the public's mind at ease that it's not an immediate threat anymore.
Is there a risk of the public having exposed to it for a long period of time?
I don't think that there's a risk for chronic or long-term exposure through the drinking water. Actually, THF is a chemical that's in a lot of consumer products that we're exposed to as well. But the fact that PUB stopped the flow of this water and purged the lines in the distribution system, I think what customers or residents like myself should do is perhaps clear our own taps at our house to get any residual out. But I don't think there's any further risk immediately from the spill.
All right, good to know. So thank you so much for your insight, Professor Snyder. We've been speaking to Professor Shane Snyder, Executive Director of the Nanyang Environment and Water Research Institute at NTU.